Harhasi. So he says, with scripture, understand what is to be done and what is not to be done. And when you mold your life accordingly, your life will become auspicious. So let's look at this. So broadly speaking, let's first of all understand how we grow spiritually. So this is a linear progression. The first circle represents our intelligence, second our mind, and a third is Krishna. So basically, when we practice bhakti, we hear the philosophy, and then there is a conviction of the intelligence. Yes. Once the intelligence is convinced, yes, this is important, this is essential, this is what I should be doing, this is what is truly beneficial for me. Then with that conviction of the intelligence, we apply the mind. And when we apply the mind on Krishna, then what happens? Then there is absorption in Krishna. So, say for example, we come to a temple. And then, now we can behold Krishna in the temple. Or right now you're sitting, you can hear this class. Or you can be thinking of so many other things. You're in the temple, you can look at some pictures, you can look at how people are dressed. You can look at how sparse or how furnished the temple is. You can think of what food is available. We can think of hundreds of things. And these all have their utility, relatively speaking. But if we want to be optimally benefited, maximally benefited actually, then we need to focus on Krishna. So, to the extent we are convinced about the importance of focusing on Krishna, then to that extent we will apply the mind. And when the mind is applied, it is applied on Krishna, then it becomes purified. So this diagram and the next diagram will be the basis of our sessions today and tomorrow. But when there is no conviction, there's low or no conviction of the intelligence, then there is no purification of the mind, instead there is oscillation of the mind. So you see, the mind is not going toward Krishna. Even if Krishna is right in front, the mind goes away, this way or that way. And this oscillation of the mind is what we need to slowly but surely check. See, for us, if we have any resource, suppose say you have a car, and that's the only car you have, you will keep it very carefully. If you have a laptop which you need for your work and that's the only laptop you have, and you can't afford another laptop, then you will keep the laptop very carefully. So whenever we have a resource which is important for us, in fact it is indispensable for us, then we keep it very carefully. Now all the resources that we may use, they are all important, but the most fundamental resource is our own consciousness. Now you could draw a bigger circle around the first two circles, intelligence and mind. And these two are the primary channels through which our consciousness comes out. So beyond the intelligence is the soul. Because consciousness comes to the intelligence through the mind and to Krishna. So this is basically these three things which have been shown. They are the channel through which consciousness transmits. And our consciousness is the most fundamental resource. To be distracted is to be disempowered. If we are distracted, then we can't do anything. Somebody might be very talented in a particular field. Somebody might be a very good cook. But if they're distracted and they're not focused enough to put the recipes right, they can't cook well. Somebody might be a good writer, but if they're distracted, they will make typos and they'll not be able to write well. So our consciousness is the most fundamental resource. And this consciousness needs to be channeled and directed for doing anything constructive in our life. And that consciousness, if you want to spiritualize it, if you want to Krishnaize it, then that consciousness needs to be directed. So now when bhakti doesn't work, what that means is that when we feel as if I'm practicing bhakti but I'm not growing, my mind is wandering, I'm feeling bored, I'm not making any spiritual growth, that's because the mind is oscillating. And because the mind is oscillating, we are not connecting with Krishna. If I go back previously to this verse once again. Suppose there's a small child and the child is very restless. And say the mother wants to give some drink to the child. That drink is actually delicious, but the child is so restless, the child keeps shaking the head. The mother is pouring the milk into the child's mouth, but because the child is shaking the head so much, all the drink is just going around the mouth, around the neck, is dripping down. Practically nothing is going into the child's mouth. And although it is delicious, the child doesn't taste it as delicious. So that's what happens to us, that Krishna is relishable. Krishna is sarva akarshati iti Krishna. But because of the oscillation of the mind, we don't experience Krishna much. And when we don't experience Krishna, we just find whatever activities we are doing as boring, as maybe just a burden, as maybe we do it as a ritual because we have to do it. But we don't find it very enriching. So now, still, if the mother holds on to the mouth and lets the child drink, even the child keeps shaking, a few drops go in. And when a few drops go in, slowly the child starts thinking, hey, this is good. Then the child sees this is good. The child may want to know, I want that, I want that, I want to look at this, I want to look at that. Gradually the child says, hey, this is nice. And slowly the oscillation stops. And then the child can drink. And then the child relishes. So initially when the mouth is oscillating, and they're trying to feed, that is a phase of resistance. And in that resistance, there is discomfort, there is difficulty, there can be even distress. So similarly, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita in 1837 that in the process of spiritual growth, it tastes initially like poison. Yattad agre vishamiva pariname amritopamam tat sukham satvikam proktam atma buddhi prasadajam. So that which tastes initially like poison, but eventually like nectar. So initially, because the mind is oscillating, there is no focus on Krishna, and because there is no focus on Krishna, the juice is coming, but the juice is not going in. So all that we experience is, oh, my neck is being forced, I want to look here, look there, but I am not able to look. For the child, it's like poison. So if we, now that our mind is by default restless, it keeps oscillating. And that poison phase will be there because the mind wants to crave for many other things and we are trying to focus on Krishna. But if our conviction is strong, if the conviction is low, then what happens? We keep shaking more and more and more, and then very little goes inside, and then the poison phase becomes very long. There is initially poison, eventually nectar. But if you keep shaking, then the poison keeps going on and on and on for a long time. But if there is conviction of the intelligence, then slowly the nectar drink starts percolating inside. It starts entering, and then, oh, this is not bad, this is good. So we pass through the nectar phase faster. So in general, whenever we have to do any activity which does not give immediate pleasure, we need to remind ourselves of why we are doing it. And especially activities that we do regularly. Then it's very easy to forget why we are doing them. So at one level, scriptural study reminds us that. So what scriptural study does it provides us that conviction of the intelligence. And that conviction of the intelligence enables us to practice bhakti steadily. So now I said that bhakti makes us steady and sturdy. So what is the steady and sturdy? Would someone like to read this?
Scriptural study strengthens our philosophical conviction that the mind's purposes for material enjoyment are misleading and degrading. We will get real fulfillment only by purifying ourselves and absorbing ourselves in inner remembrance and outer service to Krishna.
Thank you. So, that conviction that, okay, the mind is going here and there, that's not worth it. So, it's, going back to the early example of the child and the mother, the mind is like the child and the intelligence has to be like the mother. So now if the child doesn't want to drink and then the mother also starts thinking, hey, the child doesn't want to drink, why should I force? Then what will happen? The child will never drink. So similarly, if the intelligence is weak, then it's not going to work. So when the intelligence is strong, then yes, let's do it. Let's drink it. So what happens? It gives us two convictions. One is that the mind's proposal, look at this, touch this, watch this. They are all misleading. There's all the things that we get excited about. After some time we realize, hey, that's not all that exciting. So that it's not only, they're misleading. They don't live up to the promise. And not only are they misleading, they can also be degrading. Because the more we indulge in something, the more we get pulled down by that thing. If we keep doing whatever we like, we end up disliking ourselves. If we keep doing whatever we like, suppose somebody just starts eating whatever food comes in front of them. Just keep eating. And after some time they'll become bloated and then they will start loathing themselves. Why did I do eat like this? Or if somebody just sits in front of a computer or a phone and just clicking whatever links come. Hey, this looks nice, this looks nice. And they spend 5 hours, 10 hours. And after that they said, what did I do? Why did I waste so much time? And if this happens 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, then eventually the people who seem to live very free lives, doing whatever they like, usually these are the people who have very low self-esteem. Because what happens is, they know at the back of their mind, I'm just wasting my time, I'm wasting my life. And they start disliking themselves. So if we keep doing whatever we like, now this doesn't mean we have to do whatever we dislike. That's not the point here. See, what happens, we do what we like, but then even what we like, there are times you'll dislike that. And then we need to persevere through that. If today I like this, 1 hour I like this, next hour I like that, the next hour I like that, then we will not be able to do anything constructive or worthwhile in our lives. So the mind's proposals are degrading. Because they make us waste our time, waste our life, and then we fall down in our own eyes. So if we keep doing whatever we like, we end up disliking ourselves. So that is, this conviction comes by the study of scripture. That actually the mind's proposals are misleading. On one side, the mind looking here, there, not very interesting. But the second is, that actually here, looking straight at Krishna, focusing on Krishna, that is absorbing, that is purifying, that will give me satisfaction. And that satisfaction comes by 2 ways, inner remembrance and outer service. So this Siddhanta baliya chitte na kare alas, iha haite Krishna lage sudrudha manas. The Chaitanya Charan Prabhu says that don't think all this is philosophy. I want to relish Krishna bhakti. I'll participate in kirtans, I'll just hear some nice katha, I want to experience some bhakti rasa. That's good, but it says that Siddhanta baliya chitte. Don't think all this is philosophy, so I'm not interested. Na kare alas. Don't be lazy. Why? Because when you understand the Siddhanta, you get the conviction. Iha haite, by this, Krishna lage sudrudha manas. So what I said in the first slide, the image, Siddhanta balya, that is philosophical conviction. Krishna says, if you do that, then what happens by that? If you have the philosophical conviction, then Siddhanta balya, that is conviction of intelligence, iha haite Krishna lage sudrudha manas. The mind becomes focused firmly on Krishna. That's why in bhakti, study is in one sense foundational for all the limbs of bhakti. What are the 9 limbs of bhakti? Does anyone know? Shravanam, then Kirtanam, Smaranam, Pad Sevanam, Archanam, Vandanam, Dasyam, Sakyam, Atma Nivedanam. Thank you. So now, among all these limbs, where would study fall in? Shravanam. Yes, we hear and we read. Reading is basically sound vibration that is put in written form. Yes, that's true. However, study is also through kirtanam. Because when we speak, we assimilate the knowledge matter. And if we do the other things, say for Archanam, Vandanam, we recite prayers, we worship the Lord. Now all those will become animated. They will become enlivened, and we will find them enlivening to the extent we have done studies. Srila Prabhupada would say that, he would quote his spiritual master Bhakti Thakur. He said, if you don't hear about Krishna regularly, then even worshipping the deity will seem like a burden on your neck. Now he says, what is this? Every day I have to keep doing these rituals, keep doing the rituals. So what happens if we don't have the philosophical conviction? We might keep doing things as a habit, but it will become a ritual. And that ritual will soon become a burden. So don't be lazy about studying scripture. If you study scripture, what will happen is, our mind will become focused, applied, and then we will get absorbed in Krishna. So now, steadiness is one thing. So steady means the oscillation is there, but we focus it. And the second part is, the topic of study makes us steady and sturdy. So one is, can someone read this?
Sturdy.
Yeah.
We become sturdy enough to make the wild mind into submission. When we thus tame the mind, it torments us no more. We soon release undistracted, undiluted fulfillment.
Yes, thank you. So what happens is, one is the mind is wandering and we make it steady. But when we ourselves become sturdy, steady means there's no rocking. Sturdy means strong. So when we become sturdy, the mind itself calms down. And the mind wanders no more. So initially steady means there's a battle between the mind and the intelligence. But the intelligence is winning. But when we talk about sturdy, that means the intelligence is already won. In a sense, it's like a small child who doesn't want to take some healthy drink, although it's delicious, but doesn't want to take it. The child starts growing up, the child starts taking on their own. So like that, our mind matures, our mind grows up. Then it stops opposing us. And to the extent we can get to this phase where our mind stops opposing us, to that extent bhakti becomes joyful. And we all have experienced this to some extent. Say, some of us might have been eating meat earlier. But if we start practicing bhakti even for a few weeks or a few months, then we don't feel that tempted by it. We might have been eating the same thing earlier, but now when we look at it, the mind is not even agitated, it's not even tempted. So what has happened? That desire has disappeared. The mind has become submissive. That distraction no longer distracts the mind. So that is the stage where absorption becomes easier. That's when we relish bhakti at that time. So this phase, is study takes us to become, helps us to become steady and sturdy. So now, I'll be talking about this in further parts. So these are the effects, steady and sturdy. Now we'll talk about the process of how, first we'll talk about how bhakti works, or how the process of scriptural study in bhakti works. And then I'll talk about various analytical elements. So this is a big subject. Let me see, yeah. So what is scriptural study? Is it that we take a book and we read it? We may say the book was written thousands of years ago. Well, how exactly is it relevant for me? Some people can even study scripture as a ritual. That means they may take the Bhagavad Gita and they just recite the Bhagavad Gita regularly. It's good. Or they may take the Vishnu Sahasranam and recite the Vishnu Sahasranam. But they may never contemplate the meaning. Now they do it because they feel good about it, or they've been told to do it. That's good. At least they're doing it. But study is much deeper. So to understand, now some people say, I just want to study scripture. I don't want to read any commentary. Let me just, without any filter, let me read the scripture. I want to read just the original Gita, or the original Bhagavatam, or the original Vedas. Why should I read the commentaries? Yes, you can read the original, but the point is that these books are not just books. These are living books. These are books which are to be lived. And the Gita lives through those who live the Gita. The Gita lives through those who live the Gita. So to understand what the tradition, what the commentaries actually do. So we talk about Srila Prabhupada's commentary, or we talk about, there are so many devotees who give classes to explain why is that important. What is, when we talk about scripture, how does scriptural study actually apply to us when scripture was spoken at a different time, thousands of years ago? So for that, we need to understand this principle of the ladder of abstraction. See that ladder of abstraction on the left side. So what is this? That if you consider like it's a two-sided ladder. So at the bottom on the left side is specifics from another time. Then if you rise up, climb up that ladder, there is a universals which apply at all times. And then we come down on the other side, that is the specifics in our times. So generally, before I explain this ladder, this particular diagram, let's first look at the ladder of abstraction. Generally, whenever any communication is to be done, normally we move up and down the ladder of abstraction. That means we tell specific details and then we give universal principles. Say for example, now if I say that today I'll give a talk on the demographic trends, the population trends of the polar bears in Siberia or in Alaska. Say what? I start giving they were this many at this time, 1980, now 1990, 2000, 2010, 2000, what is the population? You see, what is the relevance? If you have already an interest in polar bears, it might be interesting, but otherwise, how is it relevant to me? So specifics can be interesting for some people, but specifics, okay, what's the big deal? But then if I say that based on these statistics, we will investigate what is the effect of climate change. And then can those effects of the climate change explain why we are having so many bushfires here in Australia? Then what happens? It becomes relevant to us. So any kind of communication, see, that's why if you just read news, just read the front pages of the newspapers, you might just get some information, but after some time, okay, but if you don't put it into any pattern, then it's just news that comes and goes. But then if you read some news analysis, then you have some framework in which you put the things. So similarly, when understanding is to happen, so say for example, the statistics of polar bears, that is like at the other side of the ladder of abstraction. Then what is at the universal at the top is the principle, how is climate change affecting the world. And then on our side, specifics in our time would be, how is that related to the bushfires here. So when we study scripture, it becomes relevant to us to that extent this going up and down the ladder of abstraction is done. Now Srila Prabhupada does this quite expertly at times. And if we don't understand what is going on, then we may get confused. Say for example now, there is 15:6 in the Bhagavad Gita. So, okay, let me show this verse. And we'll see if you can spot what I am saying over here. Sorry. So you can read this, and we'll see if you can see how Prabhupada is applying this ladder of abstraction over here. So let's recite this. Na tad bhasayate suryo na shashanko na pavakaha yad gatva na nivartante tadhama paramam mama. So natad bhasayate suryo, that abode is not illumined by the sun. Na shashanko, by the moon. Na pavakaha, not by fire. Na gatva na nivartante, having attained there one that does not return, and that is tadhama paramam mama. That is my eternal abode. Can someone read the translation? Who would like to? Okay, sorry.
The supreme abode of mind is not illumined by the sun or moon, nor by fire or electricity. Those who reach it never return to this
Okay, thank you. Okay. So now, do you notice something about this verse, something odd? Look at the Sanskrit. I put the Sanskrit and the English both together. Fire and electricity. Now, pavakaha, if you see literally what it means fire. Now, Prabhupada has put electricity. Now, you may get a question, was electricity there at the time when Krishna spoke the Bhagavad Gita? Well, if you look at the history of science, we say it's a recent discovery. So then what is electricity doing over there? See, if you look at these verses, the principle which Krishna is talking about here is that the spiritual world is self-luminous. It does not require any external source of luminosity. That it is self-luminous. So now Krishna at his time is mentioning the common sources of luminosity. Na tad bhasayate suryo na shashanko na pavaka. Sun, moon and fire. In fact, if you go a few verses later, 15:11 if we go to, 15:12 rather, we'll find that Krishna talks about these same three things, but in a different context. He says these three things which don't illumine, which are not required to illumine the spiritual world, they illumine the material world. Same three things. Let's recite this. Yad adityagatam tejo Jagat bhasayate akhilam Yat chandramasi yat chagnau Tat tejo vidhi mamakam. So, again, adityagatam. Aditya is sun. Chandramasi. Chandramasi is moon. And Agnau. Agnau is? So same three things. So Krishna has said over there, those three things are not required to illumine the spiritual world. But those three things are required to illumine the material world. So Krishna's essential point is that the spiritual world is self-luminous. This world is not self-luminous. Now, Prabhupada is speaking to people for whom most people live in cities, so we really don't think of the sun, moon and fire as sources of illumination. Especially, how many people actually use a fireplace and a fire? Sun, moon at least we understand intellectually. But I've traveled across the world, on only very few places, maybe some old houses in Britain or somewhere I see fireplaces. If there are fireplaces, they are mostly for show. They are not really used so often, isn't it? So now fire as a source of, that's also they use fire as a source of heat, not as a source of luminosity. So, we don't even use candles now, we use flashlights or whatever. So then, the point over here is that there is no external source of luminosity. So we live in a world where the primary sources of luminosity is electricity. Not fire, but electricity. So what Prabhupada has done in this verse, if we go over here, when he has equated fire with electricity, what is he doing essentially? The sun and moon are just natural sources of illumination. We light fire and similarly we turn on the electricity. These are more humanly controlled. So the Prabhupada is using that ladder of abstraction. So fire was what was applicable. If you go back to this ladder of abstraction now, where did it go? Over here. Okay. If you go to the fire ladder of fire, so fire would be at this side of the ladder of abstraction, another times. But the principle is that scripture is that the spiritual world is self-luminous. It doesn't require any external luminosity. And that illustrating over here is done by the point that, yes, it is electricity. So the point is not just to get it right. The point is to get it across. I might get it right in terms of grammatical accuracy. But if the point is not understood, then what is the use? So that's why I said the scripture is a living it's a living text. It's a text which is to be lived. So the point is not just to get it right, the point is to get it across. And this understanding of the ladder of abstraction and how that applies in our lives, this comes through the commentaries. This comes through the acharyas. So, what Prabhupada does is, he gives the translations, but he gives the purports. And those purports make the scripture relevant to us. So, to go for the Gita lives through those who live the Gita. Now, let's look at another example of how we could use this ladder of abstraction. So now, what am I trying to say by this point is that when we want to study scripture, how can we use scripture as a tool for increasing our conviction? Sometimes we may feel like this, I read this so many times, how is this relevant to me? We might get bored while studying scripture. So we need to use this principle of the ladder of abstraction in our lives. So let's look at an example. So we could say, there is a scriptural reference of how Shurpanakha incited Ravana. So when Shurpanakha was in the forest of Dandakaranya and Tapovan, so she like all demonesses, Rakshasis, was a cannibal. So she smelled human flesh. And as soon as she smelled human flesh, she started moving over there. And she came into the clearing and she saw there Ram. Now Ram was tall, effulgent, powerful. And immediately, her vision changed. For her lunchbox became her love interest. And she tried to proposition Ram. And when Ram refused, then she tried to attack Sita. And then Lakshman disciplined her. When she felt humiliated, she went away. And she went initially and she spoke to Ravana. Just see how I was humiliated, my nose was cut off. What kind of brother are you? You are just sitting here, not doing anything to protect your citizens, your own sister who has been dishonored. Initially, he was very angry. Ravana also got incited. How dare somebody do this to my sister, and how dare my sister speak like this to me in the palace in the royal assembly. But then, after that, he asked, who has done this? And he said, it's Ram. Ram. Now, before this, what had happened was, when Shurpanakha had initially gone to her other brothers, Khar and Dushan, and they had come to attack. So Ram had single-handedly defeated and neutralized 14,000 of them. So only one of them had escaped. That was a general named Akampan. And Akampan was doing all Kampan. Akampan means one who never trembles. But seeing Ram's prowess, he started trembling and he ran away. And he told Ravana about how powerful Ram was. So Ravana decided that Ram is so powerful, there's no need to antagonize. And now he had to save face. So he told Shurpanakha, see, they were living peacefully over there. Why did you go to them? It is you went and messed up with them. And then they defended themselves. It is you who are responsible, not them. So when Shurpanakha heard this, she became agitated. Then she decided that I have to manipulate. So she completely changed the story. She said, but did you know why I had gone there? Actually, Ram has a beautiful wife, Sita. And I felt that you deserve to have a queen like her. So I had gone just to get Sita for you. When she had gone there, she had no thought of Ravana over there. Her only thought was how to get Ram for herself. But what happens is, people can spin the story in whatever way they want. Usually, whenever there's an argument, how many sides are there to a story? How many sides? 2 sides, yes. My side, your side, and the truth. So, what happens is, sometimes people can spin the story in such a completely different way. So that's what she did. And as soon as she started describing Sita's beauty, Ram started getting agitated. His eyes opened wide and he's, yes. And then he lost his intelligence. And then he just decided to abduct Sita. So now this is a scriptural story. It's an entertaining story. Interesting story, entertaining story. But that's at the bottom of the ladder of abstraction. We might hear it and just go on with it. But from there you go to the top of the ladder of abstraction is universal principle. So the universal principle is others can exploit our weaknesses. If we all have some weakness, I have a friend who is a psychologist and he jokes. He says, a stranger is just a person whose weaknesses you haven't yet found out. So what happens is that if somebody knows our weaknesses, they can exploit us, they can manipulate us. So that is the principle which is universal. So you could just hear the story and go, nice story. But if you understand, this is a principle. Oh, okay. And then how does this principle apply today? We could look at the ad industry today, which uses sexuality to promote sales. So that is, that same principle is being applied in today's world. And in this way, when we read scripture with the living tradition, if we just read scripture as a book, we might be entertained by it or we might be bored by it because we feel it's irrelevant. We feel entertained if it's a nice story. But if we read scripture through the living tradition, then this ascent and descent through the ladder of abstraction is done for us. It's okay. So when this is done, then we start understanding. So if we study scripture, just read it as a book, that's good. I'll talk about how that also benefits. But if you want to be truly benefited, we need to do this. That we need to actually go up and down this ladder of abstraction. And we see, look at the verse, look at the purport, and then see how the purport is doing this actually. How the purport is making the subject relevant. Or when we hear some classes, we might feel, I know this verse, I know this point. But try to understand how the point is derived from the verse. Then scripture will become like a living guide for us. To the extent we can do this up and down. Okay, this is the point. What is the universal principle? And what is the application for me? Let me go back. Yeah. So, 3 questions to go up and down this ladder of abstraction. So, the first question is, would someone like to read this?
What does this point mean in its original context?
Yes. So, don't just read the story, but okay, if you read a particular point, what does the point mean in its original context? Then what is the second one? Yeah.
What is the universal principle underlying this point?
So yes, from the bottom of the ladder of abstraction to the top. What is the universal principle? Then? Yeah.
How does the principle apply in our time?
Yes. So this is the third point. How does this principle apply in our times? So when we understand, thank you. So when we understand these 3 things, so you look at any purport of Srila Prabhupada, you look at any class that is seriously scripturally grounded, you'll find this being done. And once you start seeing this, then you'll feel, oh, scripture study is so enlivening. It is it's so grounded in scripture, at the same time it is so relevant for us. And Prabhupada does it constantly in his purports. So, for example now, if we consider some point in scripture, say for example, Prabhupada at one time said that it was said traditionally that sannyasis shouldn't cross the oceans. Now what did this point? Okay, that's just a rule. See, generally what happens, if we see scripture just as a set of rules, do this and don't do this, you feel, why follow this? There is a atheist gag, like an atheist joke about Christianity. In the Bible it is said, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. That is the Bible. That's how the Genesis begins. So this atheist joke says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was no. No. You can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. So this mic seems to be too humble. Okay. Is it better? So when we, thank you. So now what happens is, whenever there is any rule given, the rule involves don't do this. And why should I do this? So if we just see the rule, it may seem restrictive. But if we see the rule as a route to a better life, if somebody says go this way, don't go this way, why not? Now if it's complete mist, and we can't say anywhere somebody says go this way, why? Everything seems misty equally for us. But then if we get the vision to say, actually this is a path, and this is a steep fall, and that is a cliff blocking me. Oh, I shouldn't go this way, I shouldn't go this way. So if we don't see what is ahead, then the rule simply seems restrictive. But if we see what is ahead, then the rule, go along this way, that rule becomes protective. So whenever scripture gives any rules, if we just present the rules, it just seems too restrictive. And this is what happens especially for many children who grow up in bhakti. If we started practicing bhakti, especially Krishna consciousness, in adulthood, we understood the philosophy and then we started practicing it. But what happens with our children is, they don't understand the philosophy, they get the culture. In one sense it's good, they're getting the impressions. But all that they get is the rules, do this, don't do this. And there seem to be so many rules. So for us, the philosophy came first, the rules came later. But for them, the rules come first. And then the philosophy may or may not come. Then they may go through a phase of rebellion. So what happens is, when rules are seen as routes to a better life, then we voluntarily follow the rules. But if we don't see the rules as routes to a better life, then why this rule? Actually, rules are required in every walk of life. That way. Say, if you consider a game like cricket. So a bowler comes to bowl. Now imagine if the bowler, instead of bowling from the opposite stumps, just comes running across, pushes the batsman away and knocks the stumps down. Hey, I knocked the stumps down. But that's not the way you should do it, isn't it? So, or the batsman is batting and the batsman hits the ball and the ball flies high into the sky. And the wicketkeeper comes to catch it. And the batsman lifts the bat and smashes the wicketkeeper on the head. I dropped the catch. Well, if in cricket people don't follow the rules, then what happens? There's no fun, even in a game like cricket. I think a year or two ago, some well-known cricketers from Australia were caught in tampering the ball. It created a big furor. Why? Because they're not following the rules. So if you don't follow the rules, then even something like a game can't be enjoyed. So rules are essential. But when players follow the rules, they say, then when we all follow the rules, then we can see who's how talented, who's how excellent. And then the joy of the sports comes out. So similarly, rules, if we see them philosophically, understand them philosophically, we see them as routes to a better life. So if we consider this particular rule, say, sannyasi shouldn't travel across the oceans. So what does this point mean in its original context when it was said? The idea is that the world out of Bharatvarsha was considered to be degraded. There are a lot of temptations. So those who are renounced should not go into the world of temptations. That was the point, was that don't go where there will be too much temptation. And what is universal principle? That we should all guard against temptation. That's a universal principle which applies everywhere. In fact, the best way to deal with temptation is to not deal with temptation. Now, it's not always possible to do that, but if it is possible, it is the best. There was a famous author, when he had to write a book, this was the time before internet came up. So what he would do is, when he decided every day I'm going to write 2 hours, so he would get into his room and he would tell his butler to lock the room from outside. And he just couldn't do anything else. Just sit and write. Otherwise, I'll go for a walk, I'll eat this, I'll watch this, do this. Nothing. So, in some ways, just keep away from temptation. It's not always possible, but when it is possible, it helps. So, that is the universal principle. That, okay, don't go unnecessarily close to temptation. And how did principle apply in our times? So when Prabhupada went abroad, Prabhupada came across the world. The principle was, what was he doing? He was actually creating safe zones where people could learn to overcome temptation. So he was, rather than getting tempted, he was actually, we say in Prabhupada in 1965 left Vrindavan to come to America. That's an external understanding. Prabhupada did not leave Vrindavan to go to America. Prabhupada took Vrindavan with him. And wherever he went, he manifested Vrindavan over there. So basically, when we have this three-level analytical frame, then what will happen is scripture study will become interesting. And that's why when you're studying, initially you might just study because I want to read something new. And that's good. It's good to read that way also. But later on, more than the speed at which we read, the depth at which we read becomes more important. So that depth comes when we start going up and down this ladder of abstraction. We'll go back further now. So this I will talk, remaining points I'll talk in the next session tomorrow. But briefly I'll mention this now. So when we study scripture, what all happens to us? One is we get information. We learn so many things which we did not know about. We may think, I know the Ramayana, I know the Mahabharata. But actually if you start reading it, there are so many small details which are quite interesting, we come to know about them. So there's information. But that's only one purpose. And if we see that only as the purpose, then after some time we'll feel, I've read these books, I know all this information. What is new about it? What happens is if we see only for information, first time reading, maybe second time reading will be interest, but afterward the interest will go away. Even when we are hearing classes, after some time we start feeling, what is this? I just heard it so many times. But scriptural study has many other purposes. So realization, we discussed briefly about how realization we get it. And that is, we need to see it in connection with our daily lives. So that is realization. I'll come to that once again later. But another thing that scriptural study does is, it also gives us satisfaction. Because ultimately, scripture is about Krishna. And Krishna is all attractive. And as we study about him, we start getting more and more satisfaction. And in fact, it is said that among all the pleasures that two human beings can have among each other, the pleasure of sexual union considered the highest. But higher than that is considered, the Bhagavatam says, is the pleasure of devotional connection. If two people come together and intimately discuss about Krishna, and both of them share about how they appreciate Krishna, the other person shares how they appreciate Krishna, then that can bring such a close, such a deep connection and deep satisfaction. So, Macchitta Madgata Prana Bodhayanta Parasparam Kathayantascha Mam Nityam Tushyanti Charamanti Cha. So, Kathayantascha Mam Nityam. The devotees constantly delight. They just speak about me, they hear about me. Nityam. And Tushyanti Cha Ramanti Cha. Tushyanti is they get satisfaction. Ramanti is not just satisfaction, but it is delight. They delight in it. Now, what is this delight? Actually, if we say Bodhayantaha before that, Bodhayantaha is, in one sense, to get a fresh understanding, to become enlightened. So, how does one get enlightened? If you see, this is 10.9 and 10.8 in the Bhagavad Gita, previous verse says that these people are already enlightened. Aham sarvasya prabhavo matta sarvam pravartate iti matva bhajante mam buddha bhava samanvitaha. Buddha. They are already enlightened. So actually the word Buddha is the enlightened one, is a variant of the same word Buddha. So those who is enlightened, and Buddha is the opposite of Mudha. So Mudha is one who has no intelligence, who is foolish, and Buddha is one who is very intelligent. So these people are already Buddha. So if somebody is Buddha, then how do they become Bodhayantaha further? So that is described, which the Prabhupada describes in a purport, that because Krishna is infinite, so each devotee can relish Krishna from a different perspective. And thus, when the devotee is relishing Krishna from one perspective, another devotee relishes from other perspective. When the two come together, both come to know about Krishna more. And thus, the process of knowing about Krishna can go on unlimitedly. And that gives us satisfaction. So, just the study of scripture itself can give us satisfaction. Because we get so connected, we get so enriched. And then eventually, the difference between satisfaction and absorption is, I'll explain this briefly, and all these points, the point I'll be elaborating in the next session. But absorption means, basically, absorption is a function of connection. When we hear one point, and we connect with some other point. Say we meet somebody. That person might be a stranger. But then they say, oh, you know this person? Yeah, I know them. Oh, really? Okay. Then we have a commonality. So what happened that when there is a connection that is established with that person, there's one connection through direct interaction, but there's a connection through someone else. Then the greater the connection, the greater, more closer we feel to that person. So like that, when we hear one point, and we connect with another point, and we connect with another point, and we connect with another point, the more we are able to establish these connections, the more there is absorption. And that absorption, there is satisfaction in it, but it's not simply satisfaction, it's just completely absorbed. It is more, just forget the whole world through that. And thus, the study of scripture can raise us above the world. And then we have all the various agitations of the world, the distractions, the disturbances. But we study scripture, during that period we feel as if we are raised above the world. And that is an experience of transcendence. So all this we can get by the study of scripture. And that is the opportunity that we get when we study scripture, not just scripture, but study scripture in the living tradition. And that is the opportunity that Srila Prabhupada has provided all of us through his books and through the tradition, ongoing tradition that he has inspired all over the world. I'll summarize what I spoke today. I spoke on the topic of how scriptural study makes us steady and sturdy. And let me go back on the PowerPoint so we can do easy revision. What happened? Yeah. So I started with how bhakti, what is the role of scriptural study in bhakti? How bhakti works is that we need the conviction of the intelligence by which there is the application and the purification of the mind. And then there is absorption in Krishna. It's like a child who has to drink something delicious but is too restless to drink it. Something nutritious and delicious. So the mind is, when we feel bhakti is not working, when we're feeling bored, that means the child is oscillating the head, is just moving the head, shaking the head, and the nectarine drink is not going inside. So the mother is like the intelligence. And to the extent the mother holds the child, slowly a few drops are percolating inside. So we need to have that intellectual conviction. Otherwise, the mind will oscillate and we will not experience Krishna. And then the practices of bhakti become like a ritual, when they soon become boring or even burdensome. We think, why am I doing this? So how do we gain this conviction of the intelligence? That's by study of scripture. And I talked about that in two parts. Scriptural study makes us steady. Steady means, first of all, the mind which is moving, we get the conviction by which, even if the mind is moving, get it back, get it back, get it back. We understand that the mind's distractions are all misleading and degrading. If we keep doing whatever we like, we end up disliking ourselves. And Krishna is, connecting with Krishna is ultimately fulfilling. And then over a period of time, as the mind starts tasting, hey, this is nice, it stops oscillating itself. And then we become sturdy, we become strong. Because our energy is not getting lost in the inner struggle, then that all that energy is available for application outside. We become determined and strong in our bhakti. And then I talked about, a major part of this class was this ladder of abstraction. That if we want scripture study to be relevant and enlivening for us, then we need to understand scripture through the living tradition. And what the living tradition does is, it helps us, guides us to the ladder of abstraction. That scripture was spoken in another time, in another place. So how is it relevant? There are specifics in another context, but there are universals which are context independent. That's the top of ladder of abstraction. And then, how does this universal apply in our context? That's the specifics at our level. So the commentaries do this. And I give the example of 15.6, where Prabhupada equates pavakaha as fire with electricity, to convey the principle that there is no luminosity. that there is no need for external luminosity in the spiritual world. And when this is done, then scripture starts becoming eminently relevant for us. And then I talked about the example of, say, Shurpanakha being inciting Ravana, and the principle that people can exploit our weaknesses, and how that is done in today's world. So this way, when we study scripture through the living tradition, it becomes very relevant and empowering for us. It starts becoming like a practical guide for us in our lives. And the philosophy comes alive. And then I talked about the benefits of scriptural study: information, realization, absorption, and satisfaction. And then specifically I talked about how do we gain realization through these three questions. That how do we go up and down the ladder of abstraction? What did it mean originally? What does it, the principle universal of that, independent of that context, and how does that principle apply to me? So there are many rules which are given, but the rules can seem restrictive if we don't know their purpose. But once we see their purpose, when we see the rules as routes to a better life, when the mist clears and we see that go along this road is more for my protection, not for my restriction, then we voluntarily and eagerly follow the rules. So that way, when scripture tells us something, do's and don'ts, if we have the philosophical backing to it, then we will be able to do it wholeheartedly. And then I discuss, we'll get information, we'll get realizations, we'll get absorption, we'll get satisfaction. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. So any questions or comments? Yes.
To apply these 3 points, it feels like it might be easier to do it with someone else. I feel like in my business, I may not have the answers. I need a little bit more insight than this.
Yes, of course. Now applying these points requires some guidance. Yeah, of course. Actually tomorrow I'll talk about realization and how this process applies in that. So in general, we are constantly making decisions. And we try to mold our decisions according to scripture. But there are so many small decisions that we make. We can't obviously either read scripture at that time or even ask somebody at that time. So we are making those decisions. So what happens is that there are big do's and don'ts that scripture gives to us. And there's a black and white zone, black and white, and there are shades of grey in between. To the extent we abide by the big do's and don'ts, to that extent we are showing Krishna in our hearts that I want to abide by your plan, by your will. And then dadami buddhi yogam tam yena mamupayantite. Krishna will give us guidance from within. So this is more like developing a compass within us. So where the compass is clearly pointing, when we are going along that direction, then the compass becomes more and more, and what the compass is saying becomes more and more clear for us. So Prabhupada writes in the Nectar of Instruction introduction, he says, once we come to the mode of goodness, then how to advance further will be revealed from within. That means our connection with Krishna will become clearer. Sattvat sanjayate jnanam. That is just one result of the mode of goodness. But in Bhakti Yoga it's further. Dadami buddhi yogam tam yena mamupayantiti. Krishna says, I'll give you the intelligence. So yes, initially we do take guidance. At the same time, if we are applying the big do's and don'ts in our life, then the smaller ones will fall in place and we can always consult to learn and to clarify and to confirm. Okay? Thank you. Yes, Prabhu. Yeah. Yes, Prabhu.
See how to apply with the present situation. It takes longer time to read even scriptures because there's so many slokas to read, even Bhagavatam.
Okay.
So what is the step forward?
Okay, so if you start doing contemplation like this, then it takes a long time to read. See, reading is a very personal activity. We have to find out what kind of reading nourishes us the most. So some of us may just feel, okay, in this Kartik I want to read the 10th canto of the Bhagavatam. And just reading that gives us nourishment. So some of us may be of a more analytical, intellectual nature. And we feel that I want to go deep, I want to assimilate. So we have to find what works for us. And yes, it's good to have at least some applicational vision when we study scripture. Now, it could be that if I'm going to read, say, 10 pages in a day, then I might read 9 pages at a normal pace, but one page, I might see one point, I'll go deep into it. So we could do like that also. We don't have to necessarily try to internalize every point. That's not possible, because we will start feeling intellectually overloaded by that. It is that basically studying scripture is a way of reciprocating with Krishna. So when we are studying scripture, at that time, some point from there will speak to us. We will read many things, but suddenly something strikes us. Oh, when that speaks to us, then we try to speak back to it. Not talk back, but speak back. Have a discussion. So unless some point catches us, if we start contemplating when there is no stimulation, then we'll just get lost. So there has to be some stimulation. So we shouldn't be so slow that in contemplation we are just getting lost and not making any progress. And we shouldn't be so fast that we don't have time to think about what we are reading. So we can find an optimal pace for ourselves. Each one of us is an individual. Okay? Thank you. Yes, Chaitanya Prabhu.
Just through the ladder of abstraction, could you explain this point? In chapter 9, I think it said something. This was actually someone had asked me that question, so I just want to. Three insects is inferior. Somewhere in the Prabhupada is explaining said that. So just wanted to understand that. Why is it said that? I mean, one understanding is that everyone is a female because it's supposed to be enjoyed by Krishna. So, just wanted to.
Okay. So why is the female gender considered inferior? Are we not planting this question to get me into trouble? Okay. Well, specifically, we have to see very carefully what the Bhagavad Gita says. So, this is 932. Mami partha vyapashitya ye pisyo papa yonaya striyo vaishya satha shudras te piyanti param gatim. Let's look at this here. So, Krishna says this verse, his stress is something entirely different. That he says, if you practice bhakti, what happened? 9:32, 33, that's it. Mami partha vyapashritya ye pisyu papa yonaya. Oh, it's separate. Okay, I thought it was combined. So, Mam hi partha vyapashritya, those who take shelter of me, yepi, even if they are syu papa yonaya, they are born from sinful wombs. Striyo vaishyas tatha shudras, that even they tepiyanti param gatim, even they will attain the supreme destination. So the point here is to stress the redeeming potency of bhakti. That bhakti is so powerful that it can elevate everyone, even those who are considered to be low-born. So the point is not to say that somebody is low-born, and even those who are considered low-born, they are also elevated by bhakti. So that is the stress. See, within scripture, actually there can be a whole class on this point itself, but a few points. See, within scripture, there are some things which are descriptive and some things which are prescriptive. So everything in scripture is not necessarily a teaching of scripture. Sometimes scripture might just be describing the way things were at that time. So for example, in Chaitanya Charan Prabhu it is described how Haridas Thakur was not allowed into the temple of Jagannath Puri. So that's a description. Is that what Chaitanya Mahaprabhu wanted? Is that what the Bhakti tradition wants? And even great devotees not be allowed in the temple? Not necessarily. But that's simply a description of the times. And many times, if you see, the Lord descends when there is dharmasya glanihi. Dharmasya glani means that there is a decline or deterioration in the practice of dharma. So if Krishna has descended at a particular time, that means the practices at that time are not the standard practices. They are declined already. And if Krishna is describing, the scripture is describing anything at the time of when Krishna is descended, then that means that might not be the scripture standard. So this is the first point. This is Krishna is describing, he is not prescribing. He's saying yes, even if somebody is considered to be low born, still, even they can be elevated. That's the first point. The second point would be that now there are on my website, if you go there, there is a commentary. One of my friends is a Sanskrit scholar. He has studied 15 commentaries on the Bhagavad Gita by different acharyas and how they have analyzed it. So almost 8 of them say that Papa Yonaya is a separate category. So there are 4 categories over here: Striya, Vaishya, Shudra, and Papa Yonaya. So those of sinful birth refers to those who are completely outside the system of Varnashram. So that means anybody can be elevated. In fact, Vedanta Deshika, a prominent commentator from the Sri Vaishnava tradition, he says bhakti can elevate even the birds and fish and animals. And he tells the story of how Ramanujacharya washed his hands after taking prasad, and that water was taken by some fish, and those fish got liberated. So bhakti can elevate anyone. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu made the animals dance. So we have the picture over here. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu making animals dance. So bhakti Papa Yonaya means even those who are of a low birth, non-human birth also can be elevated. So that is now Srila Prabhupada also gives this explanation in 2 or 3 of his lectures. That is Papa Yonaya as a 4th category. But here the way it is described is Papa Yonaya is an adjective describing the other 3. So then what is going on over here? Now this Papa Yonaya as a 4th is also reasonable, because in general, if we consider the Gayatri mantra, so that's considered a sacred mantra. It is given to the Brahmanas, given to Kshatriyas, it is also given to Vaishyas. It is not given to Shudras traditionally, but basically Brahmanas do the Gayatri and we have Brahman Diksha. Sorry, not the Gayatri mantra. Basically, when the Vedic ceremonies happen, even Vaishyas come over there. So the idea is Vaishyas are not considered impure. Vaishyas are not considered to be of sinful birth. So if Papa Yonaya were used as an adjective to describe all these, then how are Vaishyas counted in that? That comes as a question. But even if we say relatively speaking, so all that is being said over here is that those who are conventionally considered disqualified, even they are qualified for bhakti. So now why would women be considered as Papa Yonaya? See, there is a difference between Papa Yonaya and Papi. Papi is sinful. Papa Yonaya is of, you could say, of a low birth. The idea is we all have a past. And we all bring that past baggage, and that determines our birth in this life. So philosophically it is said that the human life is meant for self-realization. And for self-realization, philosophical capacity is required. Now the female body has been arranged by nature in such a way that one important responsibility which females can do, which men can't do, is child rearing. And for child rearing, now babies are not rational. They may cry anytime, they may do anything anytime. So if women who are the primary caregivers for small children were very rational, they would not be able to take care of the babies. They have to have a very high emotional sensitivity. So that is the nature's gift given to them. But that makes them non-philosophical. And those who are in the tradition of jnana, the tradition of metaphysical analysis, or those who are in the tradition of ritual purity, they may, that means the karma tradition and the jnana tradition, they may consider women to be low born. But Krishna is not endorsing that. Krishna is saying, even if you accept this, you will get elevated. That is the potency of bhakti. And if you look at the overall context from 21st verse onwards, this whole principle is, the whole point here is the glorification of bhakti. So 21, 22, 23, that is a comparison of how if you do any other worship that gives temporary results, bhakti gives eternal results. Then 25, 26, 24, 25, 26, that's a comparison of how other processes require complicated, elaborate sacrifices. Bhakti is very simple. You can just offer a fruit or a flower. So eternality of result, simplicity of process. Then after that Krishna talks about the potency of purifying one of incidental faults. That is, where if somebody, Krishna says, even if somebody does extremely sinful activities, apichet suduracharo bhajate mamananya bhak. Sadhure eva samantavya samyak vyavasito hisa. If somebody has done grievous wrong, still they will get elevated. So, that even if there's a serious wrong, bhakti can redeem it. But other paths, if you have done a grievous wrong, you may have bear severe consequences for that. You do one mantra wrong, Indra does, in one yajna, Indra Shatro, that's pronounced wrong, and the opposite results comes. Bhakti is not like that. So, there are accidental faults that might come in, and they can be overcome by bhakti. And there might be inherent faults or inborn faults, inborn deficiencies, and even they can be overcome by bhakti. So, that is the point for which this verse is saying. So, it's definitely not in any way endorsing any kind of discrimination or condemnation. Okay? Thank you. So we'll stop here. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki, Gaura Bhakta Vrinda ki, Nitai Gaur Premanande. Krishna. Hare Krishna. So I have written a few books which are available here at the table. So if any of you would like to have, this is, I studied scripture. So Gita for daily enrichment. So how the Gita's verses you do this ladder of abstraction. If you want to see many examples, there are 365 articles in this. So each article is a practical application or practical analysis of a verse of a Gita. So you can have one per day of the year. Then if reading a whole article becomes difficult, then there's 365 quotes, just one quote per page. So like I said, the point is not the point is not just to get it right, it is to get it across. So like that, simple quotes which can be memorable for you as well as applicable, that's there. This is demystifying reincarnation.